Hello and welcome to After the Bell, Mirror Fighting's boxing show. Back after an enforced absence thanks to the suspension of boxing here in the UK. My name is Martin Domin, editor of Mirror Fighting, joined as ever by former super middleweight world champion George Groves and by Declan Taylor, boxing journalist and yoga fanatic. I've just found out a new string to his bow in this, the 17th lockdown in the last year. So before we get into this week's show, do just want to mention that Leon Spinks sadly passed away on Friday evening, age 67, following a battle with cancer. He won Olympic gold in 1976. Then 2 years later, just his 8th professional fight, upset Muhammad Ali to become the heavyweight world champion. He did lose the rematch a few months later and never did reclaim the heavyweight world title, but was inducted into the Hall of Fame a few years ago. Also, incredible family, his brother Michael and son Corey, also former world champions. Our thoughts are with the family at this time. Now, we did hope to have a featherweight unification clash to preview this weekend at Josh Warrington and Can Xu. However, it does seem like a fight that may just go on and on and on. We don't. So what we're going to do instead is take a look at the subjects and topics that have been raising their head over the last few weeks while we've been away, including Josh Warrington, including his decision to give up his world title. We'll also talk about Manny Pacquiao and Ryan Garcia, whether that will happen, and if it does happen, what it will look like, whether we want it to happen. We'll talk about Daniel Kinahan, about BBC Panorama, and we'll talk about Deontay Wilder and what the future looks like for him after his former trainer Mark Whelan finally spoke out about accusations levelled at him in the aftermath of his defeat by Tyson Fury. All that to come on today's show. Please do, if you're watching, give us a subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up. If you're watching live, please do comment, chat, and we will discuss and respond to the sensible ones. Gents, thank you for listening through that introduction. How are you both?
I'm good. I'm real good. I've had enough of lockdown, but I mean that's not new, is it? That's very much how everyone's feeling. But I must say, I've really missed boxing this time. I'm glad it's back. And not the fight we wanted, not the show we wanted necessarily, but I'm glad it's back. And like you say, yoga's been helping me through anyway, mate. So not too bad.
George, I mean, you've been flirting with other podcasts, obviously, in your time off, alongside Carl Froch.
Yeah, no, I've had a wonderful time. It's been great. Carl asked me to go on his pod. That was, I think it was the end of last year. So, but it's only just come out. He was very excited about it. Hopefully it got a bit of traction. But other than that, yeah, there's not an awful lot to it. I made a conscious habit a few years ago I didn't know if it was a cultural thing from where I'm from, like just being a Londoner where kind of you're scared of overselling stuff. So you say, how you doing? No, I'm okay. Not too bad. Could be worse. When it's like, no, change that mindset. How you doing? I'm great. Wow, what's going on? I can't answer that, but I'm great.
That's great. The problem, though. You've always got to explain, though, haven't you? So you're better off just going, yeah, not bad, mate, and moving on. Then you haven't got to explain.
For someone like me who struggles with, I don't struggle with talking as such, but with conversational skills, like that's something that I always consciously work on. It's very difficult now to say, so what are you up to? Like, you got to delve back. You've got to go through history and then have the right questions to prompt the right answers. So I'm enjoying that. That's what I've been working on in my lockdown, I suppose, is trying to ask my dad, keep the conversation flowing with my dad, who hasn't left the house. And without asking, what have you been watching on telly? Because it's a bit sad. So, yeah. But other than that, it's everything's great. It's perfect. Great. Can you ask for more?
Fantastic. Okay. So first up, a little recap of the situation with Josh Warrington. He will fight next weekend. He will take on Mauricio Lara. I don't expect anyone to have heard the name, to know much about him. And to be honest, we're not going to delve too much into it because, as far as I'm concerned, it's a dreadful fight. But the fight was initially due to be for Warrington's IBF featherweight title. But actually, hang on, let's go back a bit. Warrington wanted to fight Kanju. That was the plan. Unification, Ring Magazine, established the best in the world. Great. Kanju, we couldn't agree terms. So Warrington wanted to fight Lara. IBF said, no, you've got to fight mandatory Kid Galahad. And let's be honest, that's another fight I don't want to see again. I don't think anybody really wants to see that fight again. Josh Warrington said no, so the IBF said, fine, we'll take the belt. Or Josh Warrington says, don't give up the belt. Kid Galahad will fight Jazza Dickens for that belt at some time in the future, but Warrington will still fight Lara next weekend and then hopes to fight Kanzu in the future. So the fight is really quite poor, and I can't imagine. I know Josh Warrington will probably say all the right things at Sweet George. You know, if I don't win this fight, there are no big fights, etc., etc. But it feels like this is such a pointless fight for him to be in. Surely it's not going to be easy for him to get up for it.
I think it's a tough time. I'd only imagine that the unification fight couldn't get made in the current climate. You know, he's got tremendous support. Warrington, you know, he's been on many different networks now, worked under many different promoters, and always survived and thrived because of his fan base that he has, loyal fan base from Leeds and surrounding areas. And I'm sure he's on that short list of being that Ricky Hatton type fighter who can go to the States and bring thousands and thousands of fans with him. But now's a tough time to, you know, you can't sell tickets. So they're looking for as much bang for your buck, but really it's going to be the cheaper fights. And I'd imagine this is how this fight came about in the first place and why terms couldn't get agreed in the first place for a unification. I feel sorry for Warrington in that he's kind of been snookered here where he's in a position where he wants to box. Obviously, no one wants to give up their belt, and the fight with Kanzu later is now not a unification. So, you know, he might be on the back foot in terms of his negotiations or being able to get that fight on any sort of terms that suit him. So, you know, I'm pretty sure he's probably not in the most sound frame of mind going into this fight, but he's got a job to do. He's got to go out there and do it. He's always fan-friendly action fighter, so being that style of fighter that he is probably will suit him, because even if you are a tiny bit flat, this is all you know. You know, you're not like a sharp power puncher who's, if he's a bit switched off mentally, might make a mistake, might get caught. His is just all action. So I'm sure it would be another sound win for him. But where he goes from here, it's going to be difficult, very difficult for him.
Declan, do you blame him at all for giving up the title instead of fighting someone he's... I mean, I know it was a close fight and some people thought Kid Galahad won, but ultimately the record says he won that fight. Kid Galahad has only won one fight since then. Is this an issue with Josh Warrington giving up the belt? Is it an issue with the IBF forcing the same mandatory on him again? Where do you sit?
I don't know. We've had this conversation about mandatories in the past, and Kid Galahad's only won one more fight since, but it was a real close one, the first fight, and he's done all that's asked of him. So then the IBF has reinstated him, and the problem is as soon as you start bending rules and stuff, then it becomes even more messy than it already is. So I can't say I blame him, and I think George is right, but it's just the current climate. Apparently, we've been told that Kanju didn't want to fight in an empty stadium. He wanted fans there in some way. I don't know whether that meant because he wanted more money for on the gate or whether that's just what he wanted. My issue is that he's dropped. Usually you see someone drop a belt because there is something else that they've like literally signed for. So they've gone, I'll drop that. A bit like when Fury and Klitschko, Fury dropped the IBF actually, wasn't it? Which then went to Glasgow and Charles Martin, I believe. So, you know, if you've got something actually there ready to do instead, cool. But when you do it and you haven't, and it's still like, I want to fight Kanju or Gary Russell, you know, and it's still total sort of pie in the sky, then it's annoying. I mean, I feel for Josh Warrington, to be honest, because he's a champion. He's won that belt. He's beaten, he's upset the odds against Lee Selby, Carl Frampton. He's one of our best world champions we've got in Britain, if not the world. And he's sort of been snookered, like George said, he's been forced to give up his belt. And it's a bit, whenever you see someone give up the belt without losing, it's always a bit of a shame. I feel like we have to give a little bit of benefit of the doubt these days because there obviously isn't much money sloshing around to put on shows. So they needed a cheap opponent. This guy is a cheap opponent, you've got to imagine. But I don't think there's any risk of him being flat because just the way he is as a person, as a fighter, if anything, I think he's going to be vicious and annoyed and frustrated. And poor old Maurizio Lara is going to be on the end of it. I think it could be a quick one. I'm thinking of Josh Taylor against, was it Kang Song, whatever his name was, the guy, Kong Song, where he's just like, okay, what is he, 29-2 or something, this guy, but he's never faced anything like this. So as soon as he gets caught once, he's going to be like, whoa. So I think it could be a quick one.
I think you're right about, the thing is, Josh Warrington is, for want of a better phrase, a proper world champion. The way he did it, as you mentioned, was incredibly difficult, and he sort of sat out the whole of last year. He's probably, off the top of my head, one of the few fighters who didn't actually get a run out last year despite the situation. So he's kind of hung around. Even before COVID, it was like you had that one fight and it was always the next one's going to be the big one, and I want to crack Las Vegas. And it's just, definitely, as you say, you have to feel for him in that respect. But does it play into this wider discussion? And you could bring in the WBA here with all their shenanigans about the belts. Do we need to get to a point where fighters are bigger than belts? And actually, it doesn't matter if Josh Warrington doesn't have a title. We know, and most fans, certainly his fans, know how good he is. And as long as he's in those big fights, it doesn't matter if there's one belt, two belts, three belts on the line.
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine Josh has decided to fight rather than keep his belt. There'd be ways, his management, promoters would be saying, okay, well, you can't fight this guy or you're going to get stripped, but, we'll agree to it and there'll be some sort of delays or something or other and we'll get you over the line. But as I say, if he hasn't boxed last year, he's probably just in a situation where he's desperate to box. He's thinking of the bigger picture. I don't know Josh particularly well. I've met him a few times, but he always seemed like that bigger picture kind of guy, and he'll take the shorthand now, for the payoff later. And that might be his mindset now, is just that he doesn't want his career to stall anymore. He might be thinking physically that if he's not in action in a real fight, able to, to taste the leather or whatnot, that might have a detrimental effect on him later on. It took me a long time to win a world title, so definitely, there's times when fighters will give it up when they've got something great in front of them, but giving it up when it doesn't really appear to be anything directly in front of you is tough. Like, it's got to be so tough. It must have been a real difficult decision for him to make. And they're precious things. Like you say, Martin, sometimes fights are above belts, but for me, the smaller guys, Warrington's known obviously clearly within the boxing community, but his world title carries a lot of weight for the casual boxing fan, and and beyond, because it's only really the true boxing fan that recognise the wins over Frampton and over Selby, because they're not huge superstar names. That's not the heavyweight division. So it's tough. It is tough. And, he wants to be active, I'd imagine, and he needs to be in the big fights. I hope that he gets, another world title fight soon after this, keeps the mentality of a world champion, and gets one of them big fights against Russell or, someone else in the division. But yeah, I can only say that I think he's chose to fight over keeping his belt right now.
Yeah, and what I think is also good, and what sometimes is the upshot, is okay, maybe we don't think that Kid Galahad or Jazza Dickens will be the number one in the division, but it's good that two guys who are plugging away and obviously aiming for the same thing, rather than Josh Warrington just sitting on a belt and not fighting. It is active, and they are going to fight for a world title. So there is an opportunity for both of those guys, and then they can go on from it. So I don't know. That is the one upshot, that we're not just seeing another belt sat on because of COVID. He's gone, okay, vacate. IBF, do what you want with your belt. I'm going to choose another path, like George said, bigger picture. And at the same time, two Brits get to fight for a world title, and a rematch of an earlier fight for the British title, I believe. So, you know, that's one good thing, I think.
Sure. Here's a question. Is it better, or would you rather be, or is it enough to be a world champion? Or when you go to bed at night, so let's be honest, Jazza Dickens, Kid Galahad, whoever wins that fight, arguably, is not the best featherweight in the IBF rankings. Never mind the best featherweight in the world. Is it enough to be a world champion without being the best in the world?
Well, I think that both of those guys, or every boxer, will believe that they're the best, actually, especially at that level. Kid Galahad, certainly. I'm sure Jazza Dickens does. So I don't think they're going, yeah, but he's better than me, so this probably doesn't count. Like, I don't think that. I think they'll win the belt, and then they'll think that's going to open doors for him. Interesting to hear George's opinion, because obviously, George, when you won your belt, you were the number one. So that was your, you ticked that box. But how would it have felt if perhaps there were guys that were getting more acclaim and were being touted as the 1 and 2 in the division, and you were a belt holder?
Well, yeah, I mean, you always want to be the number one. I don't say it often because I don't want to draw any attention to it, but there was 2 WBA world champions at the same time as I was. I'm sure Rocky Fielding had the regular belt at the same time as I had the super champion. So there's 2 British world champions, 2 midweights with technically the same belt. No one called upon it. He wasn't, sadly for Rocky, no one really said he was a full world champion. That belt only became a full world title when Alvarez beat him for it. And it's like, it just depends on who you are. But, so I won a vacant belt, and there was other good fighters in the division. But yeah, you're ploughing on. I mean, straight after winning that, I signed in to go into a tournament where ultimately the idea was that everyone was going to go in and the best fighter was going to come out on top. That's a mindset of each fighter. And, sometimes you can have all these thoughts and feelings, but when it actually comes pulling the trigger, do you really want to roll the dice on certain situations? To become a world champion is some feat and something to be proud of, however which way it happens for you. You'd be blessed that you're involved in big fights and big rivalries and big gates and pay-per-view fights and build some sort of memory, some sort of history, but that's not the case for everyone. So yeah, I mean, Jazza Dickens and Keith Galahad, if they fight, one of them wins the world title, nothing's going to be taken away from them. You know what I mean? In their mindset, anyway, they've become a world champion, something they've worked for their entire lives. I'm sure then, they probably want to fight Warrington in the UK, domestic dust-up, big fight. And then maybe by that point, Warrington's no longer the champion. He's thinking, I'll miss my belt now. I want my belt back. And that fight happens, So, maybe that's already kind of written down that, don't worry, you vacate, but this is here for you because these 2 Brits are going to fight for the belt. So if we can't make the bigger fights for you in another world title fight, this one's always here for you, Josh. Take this fight, get paid, keep your momentum going. And this opportunity ain't gonna go past you, because he's the biggest name in Britain in that division. So he probably will generate the most amount of money. They're all going to be vying for a fight with him. Galahad definitely going to want a rematch, and Dickens definitely going to want to fight him if he wins the belt. So his value's there. It's kind of a safety net for him, I suppose.
So Josh Warrington, Rachel Lara is on next Saturday, the first fight night back after the break. As I mentioned, Eddie Hearn, Sky Sports, Matchroom will of course look back on it for as long as it lasts next week. Moving on to a fight which may or may not happen, and if it does happen, we don't know what it will look like. Manny Pacquiao against Ryan Garcia came from nowhere. I would argue that I wondered if Conor McGregor Manny Pacquiao was far more advanced than anybody really thought. And then as soon as Conor McGregor lost the other week, suddenly Pacquiao thought, "Oh, I need another option here." It doesn't seem like he's looking at people like Terence Crawford or Errol Spence or even Mikey Garcia, who you looked at last year. This just seems to have come together very quickly. Initially, it was an exhibition, which, quite frankly, would be a farce, in my opinion. Then it was, no, it's going to be a real fight, somewhere between 143 and 147 pounds, bearing in mind Ryan Garcia's at 135. And now it all seems to have gone quiet. Some people are saying it is happening. Other people are telling other people it's not happening. First of all, Declan, do you want to see this fight as a real fight?
I mean, not really. It's not as if we're starved of options for either of them. Like I was in the panel on Boxing News the other day, and it was like my answer was, it doesn't make any sense for me for Garcia, because he's 22 years old, and he's 9 stone 9, and he's going to be fighting against a guy who in his last fight beat a big, it was quite a while ago, but beat a big welterweight in Keith Thurman. So it's like, what are you doing that for? It's not like in his division there's nobody out there. We've waxed lyrical about how that division's amazing, how there's so many great fights, and now he wants to clear off and fight Manny Pacquiao. I can't get my head around it. I don't really want to see it, because for those reasons, I'd rather see Manny Pacquiao against a welterweight, and I'd rather see Garcia proving himself in that great lightweight division. The one good thing about it, I mean, if Garcia was to win that fight, first of all, that would be massive, because he's a lightweight going up to welterweight or wherever the fight might take place, and he's very young, and it would be a legend on his record. So it would be a big win for him. And the one thing it does do is it takes Manny Pacquiao out of the Errol Spence, Terence Crawford stakes, which he is sort of being touted for both of them, which at the same time just keeps them apart. So if he's taken out of that, then actually they're both struggling a bit for opponents. I've seen Ugas now being linked with Spence and stuff like that. But at least if Pacquiao's busy, there's more chance of Spence Crawford happening. But I don't know. That's probably a bit fanciful to say that. But in answer to your question, I don't understand it. I don't really understand where it came from. I think you're probably right about the Conor McGregor thing. But yeah, especially Manny Pacquiao, we haven't got long left of him. Why would we want to see that? It's not for me. It's not for me, I don't think.
No, I think you're right. If Ryan Garcia wins, apart from the fact that Pacquiao's aging and not being out for about 2 years by the time that happens, great. But if Manny Pacquiao wins, it does nothing. What has he done? He's been a guy who's 20 years younger, a lot lighter. It seems strange. George, any appetite for it? I think it's maybe just always what everyone's thinking about the boxing days.
Hold on. Sorry, guys, my headphones are playing up. I think he's real crackly. Don't know if you can hear me now.
We can hear you loud and clear.
All right, grand. No, I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it. They're 2 weight divisions apart. I mean, Luke Campbell nearly had Garcia out of there, and Luke Campbell, friend of mine, a very good lightweight, but he doesn't quite have the resume of Manny Pacquiao. That had the feeling of someone, a TV executive or someone who don't know nothing about the sport, and he's playing dominoes like, oh, McGregor's out. What about Jake Paul? Oh, no, maybe not him. Can we get this guy? Oh, what about, no. He's got a lot of TikTok followers. No. Who's got the most Instagram followers? Oh, Garcia. That's perfect. And then when they did the Mr. Miyagi Danielson meme, that was the best thing about it. I thought that was the prank. I thought, oh, well, that's what they've done, and I get it. That's brilliant. But other than that, no. Like, Garcia is a work in progress for me. He very good fighter, extremely confident, but has got an awful lot to learn. There's still a lot of naive mistakes he makes. He gets away with because of his his speed, his punch power, his tenacity, and his attitude. But someone as seasoned as Pacquiao, still as fast and hits as hard as Pacquiao, who's 2 weight divisions above. I mean, we've seen this twice before with British fighters, when Khan went up 2 divisions and fought Alvarez, and when Brook went up 2 divisions and fought Golovkin. And then both the same sort of finish. You're not. Doesn't matter how competitive it is for a round or two. It's a 12-round fight for me. So that would be a terrible, terrible decision for a very young, promising fighter when he's got bundles and bundles of fights that could be made in and around his weight anyway. So if it's just a publicity stunt, cool. Hopefully not too many more of them, because they are a bit fantical. That's the right word. But yeah, for me, it don't really make much sense. If it happens, I'll watch it, and I'll back Pacquiao to KO him. But yeah, I don't think it's the right move for Garcia. I definitely wouldn't be advised him to take that fight.
Garcia's been moved so well, and the Campbell fight was winning that fight, and that step up and that opposition was such a great move, and the way he handled it and got off the floor and everything was great. To then go and get chinned by Manny Pacquiao right now at his age would just be the worst thing. It would just be a total disaster. I just can't. I'm sure it won't happen.
I suspect you're right. I think when it was touted as an exhibition, that was almost as bad. There's just no need.
Yeah.
And I think this is another related issue. Exhibitions are now the in thing, and I guess although McGregor Mayweather was a professional fight, that was the start, right? That could have been, if it was now, that would be probably maybe an exhibition. And that's kind of set in motion this idea of fighters sometimes fighting non-fighters, or just non-fighters fighting non-fighters. And that was for that to then sort of go into the professional realm and have 2 professional fighters who shouldn't really fight anyway, but be talking about doing something on the streets of Miami in an exhibition, just really strange. And now we have Floyd Mayweather saying he wants to fight 4 times this year. He wants to fight both Paul brothers, 50 Cent. He's going to fight in Japan as well. Of course, you've got Mike Tyson, who may or may not fight Evander Holyfield again. And you've got, Jake Paul fighting an MMA fighter in Ben Askren. It's becoming a subculture of the sport, if you like. Whether we like it or not, it's here to stay. And maybe it's because, as I said, it's sort of another thing we can blame COVID for. But exhibition fights, I suspect, George, you're not a fan. But do we just have to accept that they're just a thing, and that?
Well, not at all. We don't have to accept, and sometimes the media are to blame because they give them the headlines that they don't deserve. But I don't think it's a new thing. I don't really have any examples in front of me of fanciful fights, but they've happened throughout history. We know, as long as we can keep a clear differentiation between what is professional and what is not, what is real and what is not, and that's fine. That is fine. For me, it's entertainment. Charity celebrity boxing matches, on Channel 4 10 years ago, Ricky Gervais and a few others. I don't think anyone was worried that this was going to be the new thing, because it was very easy to see that those guys weren't real. But now, YouTubers and keep fitters and whoever else are given professional license and treated like professional fighters when they're not, and they have no intention to be. They're given belts by recognised governing bodies in professional boxing, and it's all tongue in cheek to a certain degree, but it's not. It's confusing for the boxing fan. You don't want that young generation who are just coming through, can recognise celebrities in other fields and then think, oh, they've become a professional boxer, because they can't do it in any other sport. That's the most difficult thing for me, is you wouldn't get a celebrity team running out, at Stamford Bridge to play the Chelsea first team, because they're real footballers, they're professional footballers, and they're not. You have to adhere to a certain level of ability to become professional in pretty much every other sport apart from boxing. You can be entirely hopeless and still get your pro license, which is something new. That is new, because when I was a kid, when I boxed as an amateur, it was like you had to win a senior ABA title to even think about going pro. Otherwise, what's the point? And now, you know, people have one or two white collar fights and then have a run at the pro, the pro ranks, and that's okay to a certain degree. But when you've got high profile celebrities who then want another avenue of, I don't know, followers or revenue or whatnot, and they decide to become professional boxers, it just don't sit right with me. That don't sit right with me.
Where do you sit, Declan, on the idea that these, let's stick with the YouTubers, they've got huge followings. Where do you sit on with the idea that them boxing to whatever level helps the sport attract a wider fan base?
I don't massively, because that was the big argument with Logan Paul against KSI, wasn't it? That all these people, all these teenagers are then going to watch boxing, but I don't think it actually happened like that. I think people watched that fight. They didn't watch the undercard. They didn't watch Billy Joe Saunders against whoever it was. Or I don't really see that that's what's happening. I mean, there is an argument that it might, and even just a few kids who might not have been interested in boxing getting exposed to it. Yeah, I think that's vaguely positive for the sport. But I think the problem is when it starts seeping in elsewhere. And like you say, like Pacquiao Garcia being an exhibition, it's just a bit of danger. Like, what's the point? It's a bit like Man United and Arsenal both got FA Cup semi-finals on set for Saturday, and they're like, "No, do you know what? We're just going to play each other in a friendly instead. I hope that's okay." Like, it would be absurd, wouldn't it? But I don't know. YouTube boxing is one thing, isn't it? It's one of those things I've just accepted now, because to be fair to them, they've both got these big followings, or they've all got these big followings, and if people want to pay to see them have a fight, fine, like whatever. It's like I said before, it's not for me. It doesn't cross into my realm in any way. But when it does start, all the waters get muddier than they already are, because we're talking about a sport with muddy waters as it is. So like that is a bit of a problem. Although that being said, I would probably pay to watch Floyd Mayweather fight 50 Cent. So I'll probably be a hypocrite. I wouldn't mind that. I think that would be hilarious. But yeah, not Manny Pacquiao against Ryan Garcia in an exhibition. Like, I just can't. I don't know who's thinking of this stuff. I really don't, because all of these people got boxing people around them. I can't fathom who it is that's pulling the strings and saying this stuff now. But it seems that there's such an opportunity to make money through the internet that people are just desperate to do that now, which is fair enough. I mean, you can't hammer anyone for trying to make a few quid from something, but it's just a bit of a dangerous path, isn't it? And I think we're already sort of a few steps down it, and I don't really know how we stop it, because there was a lot of moaning about the Paul fight and KSI and all that sort of stuff. It didn't stop anything. It was still on DAZN. Eddie Hearn was still on the stage. You know, it doesn't stop anything. So I don't know. As long as you can sort of in your head work out what is real and what is not, that's about as good as you can get.
You mentioned boxing and murky waters. I forget your phrase actually now, but it was a good introduction to our next more serious subject, if you like. BBC Panorama this past week ran an investigation into primarily Daniel Kinahan, his alleged criminal activity. He has not been charged, convicted of any crime. But I think rather than focus on what he has or has not done, and let's be honest, his crimes or alleged crimes are not for us to decide. The general issue is boxing's accessibility. So in response to that program, there were a lot of calls for boxing to clean up its act. This would be boxing's reckoning. It has to do something now, or it will be finished. Joshua Fury cannot happen. Sky, BT, Eddie Hearn, Frank Warren, you all must do something now. That was it. You've got to do something. Something's got to be done. That was the general consensus. but the British board have come out and said we can't do anything. He's not licensed, so we can't affect, or anyone can't have an impact on somebody who's simply giving advice. That's what he's doing. Eddie Hearn has said largely the same. I don't imagine anybody is going to voluntarily give up a slice of the Joshua Fury pie should that fight be confirmed. So the general topic, I'll come to you, George, as a man who was obviously involved. Is it too easy to be involved in boxing? Is that the issue? Does there need to be, and I don't know how on earth you start to do it, but does there need to be some overarching body who can then put in regulations that determines exactly who gets involved, how they get involved, and with whom they get involved?
There's definitely no one in boxing. So everyone says boxing is the Wild West. You know, what I mean, it's like you can come in, you can take over. Usually, it's not difficult to get a license of some form to be involved in professional boxing. And now, with the new invention of an advisory role, you don't even need to be a licensed member, a British Boxing Board of Control licensed member to work with, British fighter, which to me is a good thing, because sometimes the best people to give you advice have nothing to do with boxing. They might be from other aspects, run another successful business, but you turn professional and you have to sign a manager's agreement with a manager. Lots of young pros don't even know who is a manager or who would be a good manager and what the business entails. Anyway, but yeah, I don't know what it would look like. I just don't know what it would look like if there was any sort of senior governing body that would take care of it. Much like you've got UFC, which is, just UFC. You have to sign into the UFC to be a UFC fighter. You have to sign into Bellator, and they don't mix. It happens in wrestling, professional wrestling, where you sign to an organisation, whereas pro boxing is just a sport where you can box for any governing body under any, from any region, if that's the right term. If you're British, if you're different states in America, from all over the world, and there is no one there to police boxing. And there's always been shady characters in boxing. That's just how it's always been. But at the moment, no one on paper, I suppose MTK haven't done anything wrong. I've never done any dealings with them personally. I might have boxed a couple of fighters who were signed to them, but again, I was out of that, so I have no opinion of them. So I don't know whether they're good or bad. But I do know that they are a force. Like, they're a serious force in boxing now. They've probably got more fighters signed up than anyone else. They've got gyms set up where trainers are affiliated to their company. And that's not just in the UK. They're putting on shows. They have TV dates. So they've done deals with TV networks. They've done deals with promoters. They've done deals everywhere. There's not that many other organisations out there that are doing that. Matchroom obviously have an output deal with DAZN. Eddie Hearn, he said he's a bit part boxing pro, a bit part TV exec. He brokers deals with other promotional companies for the TV networks. He's got an exclusive deal pretty much here in the UK on Sky, but the only other company putting on boxing shows on Sky are MTK, so they're already past that point. And, it's definitely not up to someone like me to say, I don't know where the money comes from. And is that the right thing or is it not? But they're here, and I don't know, what I don't think there's anything that can be done about anyone policing anyone within the boxing world. You just hope that it's kept safe.
Has the horse bolted, Declan, or are we just being too passive in this? And can something be done?
I don't really know, because you got also remember, sometimes we forget boxing is only 100 years on from just prize fighting, two people punching each other in a ring for the entertainment of a crowd. Like, it's unlike any other sport in that it is simply there for our entertainment. And because of that, it doesn't have the same. We already know this. It doesn't have the same regulations. Doesn't have the same bodies. We talked about this with doping. And with other issues such as weight making safely and stuff like that. There aren't any overarching bodies. There's nobody who can take a look, like, if you're in football, if you're an agent, for instance, because this is the most similar sort of link, is like an agent has to prove themselves to be appropriate and this sort of thing. You can't just stroll up with a load of money and be someone's licensed agent. But there's a couple of things we have to say. First of all, MTK, like George said, are a force, and that the fighters would never of all they ever do is say how amazing it is. Daniel Kinahan, who was the focus of that BBC panorama, as it stands, is in no way affiliated to MTK, officially, and he's as much affiliated as Matthew Macklin is, for instance, who was the reason why it's called Mac the Knife is because it was Matt Macklin. Same with before when it was called MGM. He's a commentator on Sky. So, like, where do you draw the line on this? Neither of those guys are affiliated officially to MTK, the management company. So even if there was a body, how do you even start to pick that one apart? And like you say, there's no criminal convictions. There's no official link, as it were. So how do you, whether that's saying that the horse is bolted or not, it's more, where do you begin to start to police that? Because at the end of the day, it's just boxers getting advice from people. They're not pulling any strings in any other way, or certainly not the man who was allegedly linked to all these crimes that are happening in Ireland. And who are we to say that? I'm not particularly well read up on it. I'm not a journalist who's done work on this, so it's hard for like the board or for Sky or for Matchroom to even begin. It would be a moral stance, and moral stances are not very common in boxing, and they never have been. So I know what you're saying, and I know that I can understand the argument, but as it is, I can't see where anyone is supposed to intervene here. And that was what you said there, and a lot of non-boxing people, because anyone who's inside boxing knows the link and has read the articles and has listened to the podcast about this whole situation. But if you're new to it, and this is the first time you've ever heard about this, it's like, wow, this is so shocking. And how can boxing allow this to happen? But when you really think about it, on the face of it, on the facts, what is boxing supposed to do? Like, genuinely, I can't figure out what boxing is supposed to do. And even Barry McGuigan, who was on that and was outspoken about it and was totally, nailed his colours to the mast on it, he doesn't really have any solution or any idea, because I can't see where there is one. And the idea of someone advising a boxer, like George said, I don't know how you can really police that, or even if you should be allowed, because who's to say what advice you get? And if someone's advising Tyson Fury to go and have a fight, which is going to earn him 100 million quid, I would say that's pretty good advice. So in that sense, he's doing his job. I don't know. It's a minefield, isn't it? And I don't know where boxing's supposed to start. And it's not the only issue that boxing faces like this. And I believe that is why boxing is not as popular and as mainstream and as accepted as it should be, because there are too many of these facets where just the nature of the sport is allowed to become murky and become unexplainable, really.
I think you're right. I think it's very easy. Sometimes you feel like you're missing something, and I guess our Twitter feeds are probably quite similar. So you see a lot of journalists who are glad that this is now out in the open and are now saying something has to be done. And you look at that and you think, maybe it's me, maybe I'm missing something. But there are no suggestions. As I said, the only suggestions are that Eddie Hearn must do something that essentially amounts to saying, you know what, we're not going to do the biggest fight in British boxing history, one of the biggest fights there has ever been, and take a stand, as you say, a moral stand. But the idea that that fight wouldn't happen without them is ludicrous. They just go somewhere else. That fight will happen. So I don't think it's a case of people, just shoving it under the carpet or turning a blind eye. I genuinely think you're right. It's very, very difficult to think, what can be done and who would do it.
This is a sport. This is a sport. Remember, that allowed Floyd Mayweather's prison term for domestic battery to be pushed back so that he could have a fight. Like, that's what sport we're talking about here. That was a conviction, a prison sentence that was altered. We're talking about someone who, with no convictions, no official links to anything, and we just want someone somewhere to sort of say, okay, this is bad, boxing won't have any part of this. I can't see how that can work. I can't see where that can happen and how that can happen.
Agreed. Okay, final thing for this week. It has been almost a year, 2 weeks shy of a year, since Deontay Wilder lost his world title to Tyson Fury at 7th round stoppage in Las Vegas. We've seen very little of Wilder since. He has come out with a slew of accusations, conspiracy theories, and the like, many of which were aimed at his trainer Mark Whelan, who threw in the towel on that night. He kept quiet for a long time, has finally spoken out over the last few days to say that Deontay Wilder's career is finished. In fact, he basically says that he never had a career in the first place. He had one good win against Luis Ortiz. He only has his power. He doesn't train properly. Quite frankly, wants nothing more to do with him. Now, is that a little bit of sour grapes? Or is it does he actually have a point? Or is it just a bit of both?
Go on, George.
Declan. Oh.
Mine, why are we still talking about these heavyweights, man? You just said it's been a year. And there's been an article that his trainer might have sour grapes. I don't know. I'll leave it to you two.
Your favourite discussion. I must say, I think it's not just a bit of sour grapes. This is bad. This is some real bad sour grapes because okay, Breland can be like annoyed, like he's been let go, and he got a lot of heat, and people pinned stuff on him when he was just acting in the best interests of Wilder by throwing the towel in. They've obviously decided that because of that, they couldn't continue working with him for whatever reason it might be. The relationship broke down in such a way after that happened that it couldn't carry on, which is fair enough. But some of the stuff he said, like his career, there's one thing where he said, all he has is his power. And it's like, well, yeah, we know that. It's like saying all that Alan Shearer had was his ability to score goals. It's like, yeah, he's got mad power. That's precisely it. Also, he says he's only had one good win. First of all, he beat Ortiz twice. He was in the corner for both of them. And then he's having a go at the way he trains. I'm like, mate, you were his trainer. How can you say those things? Like, I spent time in Tuscaloosa with when Mark Breland was brought in, because again, we've spoken about it before, but the setup over there is that JD's is the sort of, as he would say, the sort of head coach in an American football sort of way. And then he brings in people to work with. So he's got an S&C guy. And then his boxing person is Breland. And also in that interview, he said that JD's knows nothing about boxing. And he knows that. That's why he brought in Mark Breland to help him and to take Wilder onto that level. But this is a person who walked in a boxing gym and within a year or whatever was at the Olympics winning a bronze, which is mad for a start. Okay, yeah, he's limited boxing-wise. But look what he's done. He's one of the most exciting heavyweights of his generation, if not the most exciting heavyweight of his generation. And yes, he has devastating power. Okay, he doesn't hit a heavy bag or hit a speed bag or skip a couple of things that Breland was having to go about him. But as his trainer, you should probably have told him to. And if you didn't like it, then you leave. But he was brought in and he would work with him on the boxing for 6 weeks or whatever. They put him up in a hotel in Tuscaloosa. And he'd be in the gym and he'd be working with Wilder. And it worked, didn't it? But then he came up against one of the best heavyweights, probably, for me, the number one heavyweight in the world, who beat him up. And there's no shame in that. And it doesn't mean his career's over, because it's not, unless that he wants it to be, which as far as I can tell, he doesn't. I thought it was sour grapes. To be honest, I was a little bit disappointed because such respect for Mark Breland. He's such a great fighter, achieved so much. And I thought he did amazing things with Wilder as a trainer. So to see that, and I wonder whether in a year's time or whatever, he'll look back on it and he'll be like, okay, I was harsh there. But yeah, I found all a bit disappointing. I want to see Wilder back. And with just his power, because that's all he really needs, which he's proven. The fact that he only had one good win was funny, because he did actually beat Ortiz twice. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what Mark Breland's going to do now either, because I'm not sure. He said he's done. I think that maybe he was sort of intimating that he wouldn't want to work with anyone else. So it'd be a shame, because I think he's got a lot to offer. The whole thing was a shame that the towel had to come in, because I think without that, you know, if Fury had just stopped him, or the ref had stopped him, I feel like they would still all be together and it would still be fine. But just that moment seems to have started all this. Hopefully everyone can draw a line under it a bit, especially George, because otherwise he's going to pull his hair out one of these days.
It's only just started growing back.
Do you think we see Wilder again, Declan?
Yeah, yeah, for sure, because he's still reasonably young. I think he's mad enough as well that he won't go, I think that's me. I feel like we'll see him back. I feel like without the pandemic, we'd have had him back already, and he'd be campaigning and everything. I think we'll see him back.
He's a long-running world champion, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So, but that makes it difficult. Does he want to come back does he want the easy fights for the same rewards and accolades, you know, or does he want to take a hard fight? Does he want to fight, you know, a Hrgovic or a White or someone like that for no belt? It'd be interesting. It would be interesting, because maybe his mind's not there anymore. You know, as in, it's tough to go back to that level, you know, after being a world champion for so long. Be interesting, but yeah, I suppose I agree with you, Dad, that there's definitely more left to him. I'd like to see him back, but it'd be interesting to see where he comes in at what level, and is it going to be just knockover jobs until something falls into his lap where he gets another world title shot? I'd like to see him in some real tough fights.
He's unbelievably rich, and with a beautiful house and a big family and a wife and all sorts of stuff going on. So maybe he just thinks, nah, can't be bothered. But knowing what we do about him, you would think that he will be back. Whether he can win another world title in the era of Tyson Fury is another question. But if they vacate belts and all that sort of stuff, I would still pick him to beat every heavyweight outside of Joshua and Fury pretty comfortably. I mean, Povetkin, who knows, you know, I thought that was a great fight when it was made ages ago, but for the most part, I would probably pick right now Wilder to knock them all out. So, yeah, I think I'm sure he feels the same. Stupidest thing I've ever said, but yeah, you know, he'd back himself to knock everyone out as well.
Well, the good news is, for George, anyway, next week's show should include 0 mentions of heavyweights. We will.
I thought we're doing a deep dive on Alan Babbage.
That was supposed to be a surprise. We will, of course, look back at Josh Warrington's fight with Rachel Lara, but more importantly, most likely, to what's next for Josh Warrington. But then we will preview what should be, and let's hope it happens at the 15th time of asking, a phenomenal fight at welterweight between Josh Kelly and David Avanesyan. Please do join us then. As I said, give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel if you're listening, rate and review. Thank you, gents. Thank you, everyone. And we will see you soon.